This story has been recorded at an Addictive Eaters Anonymous meeting in New Zealand. You can email us at contact@aeanz.org.
Speakers meeting tonight, and our speaker tonight is Kay.
Hi, I'm Kay and I'm an addictive eater.
Hi, Kay.
Really good to be here. I'll probably skip over my childhood reasonably quickly. A very recurring theme of always wanting to eat and never having as much food as I wanted, and always trying to get food, eat in secret. It was all in secret. Get money for food, get rid of the empties, the great mystery of Kay's weight. My mother couldn't understand why I was overweight because she didn't know that I was eating in secret. That was just what dominated, all my growing up years. An awareness of being different to other people, certainly with the food. Other people just didn't seem to be like me. Family and other children didn't seem to always want to eat, even, when I just finished eating. Just finished a meal. Always wanting more. And, just always feeling sort of apart from. And I did something about my weight. I went to a weight loss club as a teenager, mainly because my friends were getting interested in boys and I sort of thought I should be. And I knew no boy would be interested in me. I wasn't really keen to go, obviously, because I knew it would mean eating less food, and I always wanted to eat more food. But I did lose weight and put it all back on again, and decided, gave up and decided, well, that's weight loss clubs, they don't work. And I always felt different when I was going there. Even though we were all overweight, that's why we were there, I felt different. I still felt, that I was different to the people there. And it was when I was going there, when I started to put the weight back on again, that I came up with binging and starving. Prior to that, I hadn't really binged, not to the extent that I started to. Still trying to, hold on to that weight loss. I knew that I couldn't not binge, so I had the binge and then I'd try and kind of starve the rest of the week. But then that sort of led to 2 binges, and then it just got out of control, and I couldn't stop, so I gave up the weight loss club and just carried on. Definitely feeling more and more different to the rest of the world. I started working and thought that things might be better then, because I was a big grown-up person now in the big grown-up world. But it just went in one direction. That's got worse. It just got worse. To leave home earlier and earlier, to go to dairies further and further afield on my way to work to get my supplies and hide them in the filing cabinet and go out at lunchtime to replenish, stocking up again on the way home. It was just hell. It was absolute hell. And I really realised when I'd go to work and people at work would be talking about the night before, their evening, some program that they'd all watched on TV or something like that. And I used to think, if you only knew what I had been through since you last saw me. You know, I have been to hell. But, you know, I was a great actor. You know, every day was an act. Every day of my life, prior to getting well on this program, was an act. A complete act. No one really knew what I was like. No one knew about my eating, and no one knew me. Anyway, when I was 18, all the weight was back on by then and more, and I read an article in a magazine, Are You a Food Addict? It was an Australian magazine, and it was advertising a 12-step fellowship for food, and I could identify. I could absolutely identify. You know, talking about, you know, kind of eating when you don't want to, or eating out of rubbish bins, and, you know, not just eating a lot. It was saying more than just eating a lot, you know, it was sort of going into, you know, specifics and that I could relate to. And I wrote over to Australia, and I wrote a great long letter. I'd never said anything to anyone about my eating prior to that, but I wrote a letter about myself, you know, keen for them to say, oh yes, you know, you're one too, you sort of thing, you can join. And then I wrote another one to someone in New Zealand when I got in that contact in New Zealand. I wasn't looking for a solution. The problem, as I saw it, was the weight, and I'd done that weight loss club and it didn't work, so I wasn't looking for a solution. It never occurred to me in a million years that I could be free from wanting to eat all the time, so I wasn't looking for anything like that, because I thought I would be like that till the day I died. And I used to wonder how I'd get on in an old people's home, because I knew that when I was there I would still want to eat all the time, and how would I get the food? So someone contacted me, and where I lived, and we arranged for them to come and see me in my home, in my bedroom. I was still living at home at that stage, and I smuggled them into my bedroom, shut the door, and when Mum asked me afterwards who that was, and I said, no one. I think I could have come up with something more imaginative, but no. I mean, it was a pretty good lie, but I couldn't think of my feet with that one. The big thing for me was that she was slim. That was massive, because, you know, as I said, the problem was the weight as far as I was concerned. She had jeans on that went straight down. I had jeans on because I used to have a big problem with my legs rubbing together, the tops of my thighs rubbing together, so I wore jeans, but they were always flared, because, you know, you needed a lot of flare down the bottom to counter all the size at the top, you know, so I in no way would have ever worn straight trousers. And she had her top tucked into her jeans, tucked in, so you could actually see her shape. And I just thought that was incredible. I was into long flowing muslin tops. I was wearing one that day, covering, you know, keeping well covered, the rear end well covered. And so that I found very impressive. Those two things were huge in my mind, huge. And then when she started to talk, of course, she, you know, was just talking about the things that I had done with food, and I just was absolutely amazed. I thought she was much worse than me. She was actually an alcoholic and drug addict, and pretty shocking. But she didn't seem like one. She seemed like an angel to me, very, very, very angelic. And she spoke kind of like an angel too, very sort of soothing voice, kind of voice you could just listen to on and on, which, I could. And anyway, she took me to my first meeting. She saw me in the weekend, and the following Wednesday, there was one meeting a week of the fellowship, and she took me to my first meeting. And I remember that meeting very clearly. I was absolutely amazed. There were a couple of men there. There were a couple, and the men were alcoholics too. And one in particular I found very scary. But they were talking about things that I could identify with, and I didn't say much. For quite a long time. I continued going to that meeting. She took me for quite a while, because it took me a while to realise that I should be taking myself. I could take myself, and eventually I ended up taking myself. But it was amazing. The thing that really kept me coming was the identification, because I just never had that with anyone out there, because I'd never told anyone about my eating. Maybe if I had, they might have said, "Oh, well, I'm just like that too," but I'd never told anyone. And the big thing that happened to me food-wise was I stopped binging. And I lost weight. I wasn't very interested about the program on the wall, 12 Steps, Higher Power, didn't really apply to me. Didn't really see how any of it, I didn't understand most of it, but the Higher Power, I couldn't really see how it was relevant to me. And I was losing weight, and that was the problem. I was enjoying the meetings because I could relate, so I was pretty much fine. And I ended up leaving the city where I was and going up to the North Island because a boy had expressed an interest in me. And this was a first, so I didn't ever think there'd be a second. So I thought, well, I better, follow him around, and he was in the North Island, so I arranged a job transfer and went up to live in the same city where he was, boarded with a family up there, and I remember driving up in my little car, and I remember thinking, oh well, I can't eat, overeat, as I saw it then, anymore, but at least I can still drink. And that was a pretty strange thought for me, because I'd only ever been to one party. I was 18. But I didn't, go to parties because of how I looked, and I'd rather stay home and eat anyway. So I'd only really been to one party, and I remember it well. I got drunk at that party. I thought it was a great party. Great party. But, that was it. And I went up there, and I went to meetings up there. I was going to AA meetings for my food, as well as, food, 12-step fellowship for my food. So, I can remember the first AA meeting I went to up there. Just arrived up there and stayed after the meeting and kissed the secretary. Yeah, I never thought that was odd. I never thought that was odd. And I can see now it's rather odd. And quite unwell. I can see too that probably the person I was kissing was probably quite unwell too. But no, I didn't see that as strange or odd at all. And started going to meetings regularly. I don't know if there were people in recovery. I wasn't in recovery. But I didn't, hear recovery. That might have been just where I was at. I don't know. But I was on a food plan. At that stage, having 3 meals a day, but I was quite obsessive about my food plan, certain aspects of it. I used to have a lot of rotisserie chicken. I used to go down to the supermarket at lunchtime and buy up a chicken and sit in the car and weigh out something for lunch. And I used to keep it in my bedroom at where I lived because I didn't want anyone else eating it. And the cat was always hanging around my bedroom, and I was always thinking about how to kill that cat. Because, as far as I was concerned, that cat knew my secret. That cat knew what no one else knew. And it could be quite possible that other people might have been able to smell it too. I hadn't actually thought of that. Thought of it now. And KFC coleslaw was another obsession. And I was driving home from a meeting one night and stopped in at KFC to get my supply. And when I came out, there were a whole lot of young youths around my car and just gave me a bit of hassle. I got into my car quickly and drove off and drove through a giveaway sign and wrote off my car and 2 other cars and ended up in hospital with a blood clot on my arm and 26 stitches in my head. And, so I see that totally as a result of my eating, that accident. And I was very, very, very grateful that I hadn't injured anyone else. That was very high in my thinking, which does indicate to me that amongst all the unwellness, I must have had a bit of a conscience there somewhere, just, deeply hidden. So anyway, that just continued. My boyfriend was in a sort of a party scene. We used to go to parties quite a bit, and I picked up, if you like, the addiction to alcohol. I do believe now I was an alcoholic. Even before I started drinking, I just needed the alcohol. And, as soon as I had that, I was drinking alcoholically. And I was out, in public with that addiction, whereas the eating was always, in secret. So I was, out in front of people, but, I enjoyed that because, I could talk to people with alcohol in me, which I could never do, so, although I was very much full of the obsession when I was out, I also enjoyed those times as much as, an addict can, because I was uninhibited. Anyway, the whole time the disease was just getting worse and worse, and I had 2 more accidents, I think, while I wasn't supposed to be driving, and I was chased by a traffic officer one night for 15 kilometres, and just all sorts of madness, absolute madness. And anyway, eventually I shifted back down to the city where I was 12 stepped, and went back to the meetings here. And by that stage, that same person that had 12 stepped me that day, a couple of years previously, was still at the still there and in recovery, and a couple more people, were in recovery too. And I started coming along to regular meetings, and just started to feel more and more uncomfortable. More and more uncomfortable. I, as I say, I was on a food plan up in the North Island, and I was reading out my food plan to a man in AA. It's a very long food plan, very, very long. And when I got down here and I started reading it out to my sponsor in the fellowship here, I realised that I wouldn't be able to read out all this lengthy food that I was actually eating, that I'd have to condense it, not change what I was eating, but change the colour pen. And so, what I was actually eating was written in one colour, and what I was reading out was written in another colour. Probably sounds a bit weird, but, it was weird, but, 4 ounces of protein I would read out as 4 ounces of cheese to my sponsor, no, 2 ounces of cheese to my sponsor, but what I was actually eating was, an ounce of this, an ounce of this, an ounce of this, an ounce of this, sort of thing. I'd be, a lot. And basically all it was I wanted to eat. So I didn't want to have 1 lot of protein, I wanted to have 4 lots of protein. And anyway, I started to go quite mad. The same time as I was going to the meetings back here, we're no longer in a party scene. We bought a house, got married. In fact, the only alcohol I was drinking was a liqueur with my husband in the evening. We had a liqueur every evening, except if he didn't mention it, then we didn't. And then I'd be absolutely furious because I couldn't mention it. It couldn't come from me, it had to come from him. And sometimes I don't know why he wouldn't mention it, but why he forgot to or didn't want one or whatever. But so that was kind of what was happening with the alcohol, if you like, at the same time. And I thought I was okay, but then I would come to a meeting and I would hear these women in recovery, and I would feel like going home, driving home I'd feel like driving into a power pole. The meetings were actually making me feel suicidal. And I firmly believe it's because I was hearing that recovery. That recovery was hitting me in the face, and my disease was not liking it. And that's the way I see it today. And I don't know what to say after that, but one day I just woke up and I couldn't go on. Occasionally when I was sitting in one of these meetings, a feeling would come up in me that I might have to go to these people that were in recovery and be completely honest with them. And I'd think, oh no, I'd shake my head furiously. No. Oh, no. I couldn't think of anything worse in the world that anyone would possibly do. No, it was just an absolutely horrific thought to me. I just sort of tried to shake it out of my head. And then one day I just woke up and I couldn't go on. I just couldn't go on. I couldn't get up and go to work. I didn't know what was wrong with me actually. And I rang it was probably my sponsor I would have rung, and said, could I come and talk to you and her sponsor? And I don't know if she'd said to me, what about? Because I probably would have said, I don't know. Because I actually didn't really know. And anyway, I went round to her house, and this, the other person, her sponsor, who was the woman that 12 stepped me, was there as well, and she was knitting. And I couldn't believe that my life was over and she was knitting. How could she knit? How could she knit? But of course she could. She was free. She was in recovery. She could knit all she wanted to. So I really don't know what we talked about that night, except I know I was completely honest for the first time in my life. Completely honest about, everything, certainly what was going on, at that time, and sort of leading up to it, probably since I don't know. And I don't know what they said, but I went home and I went down to the bedroom, leaned against the bed on my knees and said, if there's anything there, can you please help me? So I think that must have probably been suggested to me. I just cannot believe that I would have come up with it myself. And my husband came in and asked me what I was doing, and I shot under the bed. And he said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm looking for a button. And my heart was pounding, like I'd been caught in some dirty act, And so that was basically the first time in my life that I had asked, for help. And I didn't actually think there was anything there, but that doesn't matter because I know today that there was. And, my higher power, was there wanting to help me and always had been. Always had been. I don't think it was, that the help hadn't been always there. But, the disease was just in the way. And, so I couldn't get the help from my higher power. So that was that day, and I took the next day off work because I knew I needed to be honest in the meetings. There were more meetings by then, and there was a meeting the next morning, and I knew I needed to share with people, in the fellowship. So I went to that meeting. And saying that, saying I knew I needed to, that might not be true. I might have been suggested, I might have been told to go to that meeting. I couldn't say for sure, actually. But anyway, I went to the meeting. And the next day, I went back to work, and I was fine. Had my breakfast, had my lunch. And then for afternoon tea, I had my cup of coffee with half of my lunch milk, which is what I'd always done. I'd always had half my milk in my coffee at lunchtime, and I'd always had my other half of milk for afternoon tea when I was eating. But, that day, I didn't get the feeling at lunchtime, but at afternoon tea, as soon as I had a drink of that cup of coffee, that feeling was back. Immediately, that feeling was back. I can't go on. I can't. What is wrong? And, I know today the war was back. The addiction was back. And I had actually had a day without it, I do believe. So I rang my sponsor, which wasn't easy because the phone was right by our head typist's ear. And I rang her and I sort of said, whatever I said, which must have been a bit cryptic. And, she was saying, what's happening? I was trying to tell her I just had this drink, and she said, something like you had your milk in it. Oh, you've eaten. And of course that would explain everything at her end. And I said, have I? And that was a genuine mistake, I think. I did not realise, whether I didn't realise milk was food. I suppose I did because it was on my food plan, but, it was just what I'd always done, and I just continued to do it. I didn't think, I obviously hadn't been honest about it, or my sponsor would have said. So, so that was the last time that I had picked up the first one. And even though I did that, I actually believe that a couple of days previously, when I woke up in the morning, that step one, looking back now this is, had happened to me. I believe I woke up that day, surrendered. Even though I knew nothing about surrender, I knew nothing about powerlessness, I knew nothing about anything much, but it happened to me, even though I ate a couple of days later. And so the other changes that happened, basically the honesty came first. I had to be completely honest, and then I got that little bit of open-mindedness, enough to ask a higher power for help, right on the heels of it, straight after the honesty pretty much being bang. And then the other thing that came straight on the heels of that was the willingness to do what the people in recovery were doing, basically. That was how I saw it. We always had the person that cleared the mailbox, always brought 12-step letters to the meetings. They sat over on the side, and I had never shown any interest in them. And then all of a sudden, I just developed this absolute burning to get these letters. And, I'd be sitting in the meeting trying to see how many letters were over there, and trying to work out who was going to be going over to them after the meeting, and I'd have to get over there before such and such or such and such, And, my sponsor would, might be talking to her sponsor afterwards, because I knew they'd be interested in the letters, so I had to get to the letters before then. And that just had not been there before. And all of a sudden it was there, 110%, the want to come to meetings, the want to ring people. I was a avid phoner of people in the fellowship, and probably drove everyone completely potty. And there was another girl that was in recovery. She was younger than me. She was very hot and strong and phoning too, and we would spend hours talking on the phone to each other, because she just needed to be talking to someone all the time, and so did I. So, there weren't, too many people that we could talk to for too long, so we just talked to each other for ages, Goodness knows what we were talking about for so long, but, it was filling in the time. It was filling in the time, until another meeting. A lot of that early time was just hanging on till the next meeting. I started going to a lot of AA meetings too, because, they explained to me about, how I had to put down the alcohol and drugs and food, the whole that, addictions can swap. And it wasn't just a matter of can swap, it actually had been my experience of swapping. So, I had to start actually going to AA for my, my alcohol addiction. And so with that and the food meetings, I was going to a lot a lot of meetings for quite a long time, but yeah, I just needed them. I just needed them. But the thing that was happening was that time was passing and I wasn't picking up that first one. And, that was very, very important, to get that distance up, between me and the food. And, often I just felt like I was hanging on in those early, certainly months, but, even getting into years, just to get my head on the pillow without picking up that first one. I've just got to get my head on the pillow. And then, the days were difficult. They were. In some ways they were a lot more difficult when I was actually eating. But, if I just managed to get my head on that pillow without eating, it was a good day. It was a good day. And it gave me a chance, a chance for the next day. So, so that was a long time now, and I've just continued to do what those people that were in recovery at the beginning were doing. I've always so I was going to say I've always stuck close. I've always known the importance of sticking close. Always known the importance of sticking close. I did go away overseas and for a couple of years, and strayed a bit, I guess. But I was drawing very, very heavily on all the money in the bank that I had got up to that point, and it was running out. It was running out. So I'm very grateful that when I got back here, I threw myself back into what I know worked, and I do very much believe that meetings are the treatment for what is wrong with me, and I've hardly mentioned my higher power, and I don't think you can mention the steps at all, but obviously, for me, that is why this program works. I am beyond human aid, and I do absolutely know there is a higher power today, and that consciousness and conscious contact with my higher power is growing. It's growing very much, and it's helped, for a much more peaceful life, I guess, peaceful, enjoyable, content life. I have been looked after, every day in recovery up until today, and when I was eating I was looked after then too, and I do believe that, that is absolutely no reason, why I shouldn't be looked after tomorrow. And I'm very, very, very grateful. I personally haven't needed to look beyond these 12-step fellowships that I belong to. I haven't needed to go anywhere else or anything else that has come up in my life. The program and the fellowships, have given me everything that I need, and I've got a lovely little life today. Very, 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 very fortunate. Lovely, lovely life. So.